Oh,
So,
first time.
yeah.
Okay, to be honest, the one that, like, it's not the best, but, like, yeah, it is what it is.
Yes.
I make it when I'm, like, sick. In a lot of, like, South Asian cultures, when, you know, you have guests come over, like, the first thing you do is, you know, offer them tea, water, something to drink. And, you know, you usually make chai for them, have some food, some snacks. And even growing up, like, I'd always see my mom, her friends, her family friends, you know, always hang out and have conversations over a cup of chai. And so it just felt very fitting that you know, we're gonna come over, have a conversation about culture and identity, and yeah.
Do you find you're often practicing or bringing certain traditionals that your parents introduced you to? Do you find there's still some that you carry on? For example, the chai.
Definitely, like, when I entertain, I notice similarities in terms of, like, I'll always have, like, way more food than is needed. And also I like to, like, have it out and in both, like, just, like, in on the table for people to help themselves. Just, like, offering people something when they come in, I've noticed, like, it's just something that my parents, I mean, most people are taught that too, but yeah, it's like, you know, when you come in, ask if you want a glass of water or something, if you have more than water, juice, but I don't have juice, so.
Yeah, that was one of the first things you asked me when you
Yeah,
came in.
it's just
or if
almost
I
a
wanted
habit
water.
now, because, like, you know, you're thirsty, like, people are thirsty when they come in. Yeah, when people ask me if I want a glass of water, I would love one. Yeah.
Yes. They're also, like, just feels like a way of taking care of one another too. It's like, you come into my space, what can I do for you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay, like, you're here, let me, like, you know, be comfortable, let me just almost, like, you know, I'll take care of you while you're, you know, in my home.
Yeah, it's such a, like, a nice sentiment.
Oh, okay, so wait, about the tarot card thing. So
Yes.
when I was in India with my, so I told you earlier that my aunt is doing, like, a astrology course. And so she was, I guess, like, telling me my reading a bit. And it was so interesting in that she was like, I was like, oh, am I gonna, like, lose weight or something? And I was just, like, joking. She's like, oh, she, like, laughed, and she's like, actually, it says, like, around 30. I was just like, oh, okay, cool.
Wow, like, they can tell, like, what age something is gonna happen
know. I don't know if I fully, like, maybe I just don't understand it that much.
Yeah.
But I just thought it very, like, yeah.
Are you a spiritual person? Would you consider yourself spiritual?
What do you mean by spiritual? To define that a bit. What do you mean as what your definition is?
I feel like it's actually kind of difficult to define. Like, I'm not even sure if I'm spiritual either. I'm definitely not religious. But I guess one thing I'm thinking about, like, how you like fragrance a lot, and it feels like you've set up rituals in your life and, like, things for you to feel like safe and at peace. Like, do you find, like, the word spiritual, do you feel like that goes along with some of the rituals that you have in place?
Not really.
No. They just are.
I don't know if I'd use that word. But what you're saying is, like, for me, it's more about, like, routine, you know, and things that just almost, like, feel good. But I feel like a lot of, like, spirituality is about that and about, like, finding inner peace and, you know, hope in the world and just doing things out of, like, ritual and habits, and, you know, it gives you something to hold on to, almost something to
feel grounded.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost just like, what do I do next, you know? It's like, oh, it's already, I've decided. In the morning I wake up, I, you know, brush my teeth, floss, all that, and then I'll light some incense. And it's interesting, my dad actually, every morning he prays and he lights incense for that in the morning. And, like, growing up, it was always like that. So who knows? Maybe it's from that.
Yeah. The little things. I guess we take
Yeah.
after our parents a little after all. Yeah. You mentioned before how like Ada doesn't quite feel like home because you didn't live there, you didn't grow up there. So then where is home to you? Or like what makes a place or somewhere home?
I'd say for me, it's more about like my inner peace. And so that's why I don't think it's connected to a physical place.
Yeah.
It's just about where I feel the most safe and comfortable. Yeah, I'd say that's home. And that could be, any country, any city, any apartment house.
I love that inner peace. That's so nice. Yeah. I try not to look.
That's the one I told you I don't like.
Yeah. I had to pull up this
Yeah,
one.
that's from my high school graduation.
So this is in Calgary
Yes,
then?
it is. It's the street that my parents' house is on. Yeah, it's where I grew. The house I grew up in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do your parents still live here, like on this street?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting though, because like our house does not look the same at all. Yeah. The year after I moved out, my parents renovated, and then also a few years ago, like they renovated one part, and then they did the kitchen 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So the house was completely different than when I grew up there. Like nothing is really the same. But I could like that. I mean, I just think it looks better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense with your interior design. You're probably like, yeah, you should have done that a long time ago.
I mean, I was very involved in that process, and then like while they were renovating. So yeah, I did the kitchen part. I designed it, and I was in Calgary at the time. It was still like when we were doing school online, so I was very much involved in the designing and also like the project management of that, and it was such a cool learning experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Would you say that's your childhood home? Like that's...
Yeah, I mean, we moved there when I was 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the house you spent the most time in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's cool that like you like the changes. I feel like sometimes, or maybe this is just an assumption that I have, a presumption that I have that when your childhood home looks different, it's kind of scary.
I mean, a lot of people, it depends on the person, I feel,
Yeah.
you know? A lot of people don't like that. Yeah. I just think it's just like, I don't know, things change, people change. I'm not that sentimental towards, I guess, like, things like that, because it's more connected to is like the memories, and those remain with you, you know?
True.
Yeah. The house, it's a building, you know?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it. Have you always been like that? Like, do you feel you were always good at letting go of... No.
I feel like that has come in the past few years. Before I was very much not like that. I would just really get very anxious and worked up and hold myself to just put a lot of pressure on myself, you know, to have things done a certain way or in a certain time frame. And it took a lot of, I feel like, just like learning myself and learning about how I think, operate, to understand that a lot of these restrictions I was putting myself on just were not allowing me to, we're just almost like setting myself up for failure, because it's like, hey, that's not how I work well, that's not how I think, so it's just not gonna have, the result's not gonna be there. So better to be more realistic with, you know, I realize with my own strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes just to like, you know, let go and trust myself that I'll figure it out. Yeah. But it's definitely like, you know, it comes and goes, I feel. It's like something that I feel I need to like, it's something to be like practiced, that I need to maintain practicing. And over time it gets easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, any sort of growth, any sort of change, like, doesn't happen overnight or doesn't happen like in a linear way.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. That was a big thing too. Was like trying to like accept that things just don't happen was in a linear way, and I can't hold myself to operating in that way, because that's just not who I am. So yeah.
when did you start to figure that out? Like, were you still in school when that
Oh,
was
yeah.
that change,
Yeah, yeah.
that shift was happening?
I would say like, so I think 2020 onwards, after like so after school, university went to like being virtual. I was like, I realized I was having a lot of trouble with just like my mental health and anxiety, and also just concentration, and because at that point then I had like no structure, you know. And I was so overwhelmed, like, and just not sleeping, and I wasn't sure what was happening because I didn't recognize how I was like, what was going on with myself and my body. And I think I realized that after that, I, like, during that time frame, like, I went to my doctor, and I was diagnosed with ADHD, and we started like medications, but that takes time to figure out. And I started with therapy and coaching, like, I guess like ADHD coaching. And that helped me a lot because it helps me understand how my brain works. And I almost had to like relearn how I operate and think, because what I was doing before was putting, like, hearing how other people are more neurotypical approaches, and trying to constrict myself to that, which would end up leaving me feeling very frustrated. So yeah, I feel like that was a big part of discovering myself, and also like how I think. Yeah. But it was definitely, it's been like a journey of like, 2-3 years. Yeah.
It's so great that what you did with it was you're like, okay, like, something's not quite right, and you went to find help with that, like, support. That's really great.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's kind of like almost like I really at that point needed to do something. Yeah, because I was not doing well in university at all. Which, that's another thing, is like before that I did pretty well. I managed to get by. I always had some sort of support in terms of like something was always there that would help me. But then once I was in a virtual environment, a lot of those things were gone.
Yeah, it had to be self-paced,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. I think I learned so much through that process. And even like with my education, I felt like I was able to really learn things better once I could really figure it out a bit more. Yeah.
And then I think another part is that we're taught not to talk about certain things, or if we do, we have to do it really carefully. And even just like about mental health, like, and even for cultural reasons, just mental health, just in general, the stigma of it, it's so hard to break. And now it feels like some things are acceptable to talk about, but some things still aren't acceptable to share. And how much can I talk about it for, and for how long? Am I taking up too much space? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that sort of the restriction, or like the tension that you're feeling as well?
I am. And also just like, who's gonna see it? And there's also like a vulnerability aspect too.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like there's anything wrong about it. I think it's good to have these conversations and for people to see and hear these conversations. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was a interesting journey figuring all that out while being in school. It was just like, I feel like I almost had to reach a very low point, you know, and go back up.
You want a break?
Sure. You know, I grew up in Canada. I moved here when I was 2 years old from Singapore. So I've never lived in India. I visited, but it's very different when you're visiting. And so it's always been something that it's like, hey, this Indian side and Canadian side. And then even in like our family dynamics, it's, you know, the two worlds almost sometimes clash.
Yeah.
And it just leaves you feeling like, okay, which box do I fit in? And even when you go back to India, like my grandparents would be like, oh, you're Indian, you need to like know your mother tongue and things like that. And I can understand Hindi. I can't read and write. I can speak it, but I mix up the grammar, things like that. And then just like, you know, I guess leaves you feeling a bit conflicted because like I'm not Indian. Like that place is not. It's not where I'm from. I guess it's like not home for me. But then I am Canadian, but I guess that's where it comes in, like Asian Canadian, Indian Canadian. For me, I've just like found it easier to not have those, I guess, preconceived boxes and to just ignore all of that almost.
Yeah.
And just like, hey, this is every individual is different. Just, you know.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Like a similar journey. Yeah, definitely had people in my life tell me I wasn't Chinese enough, or other people telling me that I guess wasn't Western enough, or clearly was different. Yeah, it definitely felt like there were two worlds and I couldn't quite fit into both. But then I realized that was just an idea that was being put on by other people, not necessarily by me. So I think a really big part was letting go of that and just being like, I just am, like I'm just existing. And so it's not Chinese enough or like Western enough. It's like, I just am. Like I was born here, lived here my whole life. I'm Chinese, my family is Chinese, and like those are all parts of my identity. So it's not like I'm missing something or something part of it's broken. Like I just have all of it.
I feel very similarly. How did you go about letting go of that, I guess? You know.
I'm actually not sure. I think it was really gradual. I didn't realize it was happening. I think maybe I read something, I think maybe the first time I was reading the definition of diaspora and feeling connected to that definition, and then starting to read up on like different essays or like articles about that experience, and people having that realization before me, people being like, the two worlds coexist. Like I'm entirely both. I'm both of those, not half of either.
Exactly.
And just hearing that, even if at that time I read it, it didn't quite resonate yet, it eventually did. So I think that's honestly one of the best parts of, like, I get the motivations of this project is just talking to other people, because being able to share, like the fact that someone posted that or someone published an article and wrote about their experience, like that has impacted how I think about myself and my own identity. And I think that's a big part, is just like talking about stuff with each other.
Because honestly, I don't think I've had this conversation with my friends before, and a lot of my friends are, you know, Indian Canadian or Asian Canadian, and we've never talked about it. And like, I've personally not read any, I think I have read a few maybe, but like essays or things like that. I remember university being talked about in some classes, but it's something that I do want to look into more, because I guess like I didn't really think that much about my Indian identity in the past few years, because especially like, you know, I don't live with my parents, I live here, and I haven't been to India in many years, so it's just not something that I thought about that much. But then while I was in India, it kind of, a lot of it came back. A lot of memories came back of growing up in an Indian household and going to India every year, every 2 years, that other side of me, you know? And it's been very interesting, like, exploring that and kind of allowing that to happen and giving space for it.
When we had first met, you had asked me, you had asked us about our definition of Asian or like Asian Canadian, and that you had expressed some like uncertainties around that. I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate, like what were you thinking about at the time?
Could you remind me again a bit about what we talked about?
You just checked in about how we're showcasing like Asian identities. And you're like,
I was just, I think I was just thinking if I fell underneath that category, you know? Because often when people say like Asian, they don't always, like, I feel like India or like South Asian is sometimes something separate. So that's where I was just like, you know, trying to get a bit more understanding of. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Russell, for asking that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, but like where I grew up, I feel like was quite a diverse area in terms of ethnicities. Like the neighborhoods that I grew up in had a lot of like Indian people, like Chinese people, Filipino people, and even like my schools were very mixed. So like my friend groups have always had people from different Asian cultures in them, and it's actually primarily like just Asian cultures in that neighborhood a lot. So that's why there's still a, you know, some like connectedness in that, in terms of like cultures and things like that. So yeah.
Do you still feel included when, if you see someone describe like a film or a project or something as Asian, do you feel included in that, or is your instinct like, okay, I'm not sure if, like, is it Asian or is it East Asian? Like, what do they really mean by that? Do you have a thought process like that?
I would say that, I don't know if I'd see myself in that, but I feel like there's similarities for sure. So in a way, I guess I do see myself a bit in that for sure. Yeah. I think it really depends on the context and the actual specific, you know, specificness of it, right? I think also when it refers to like something being Asian, even if they are talking about maybe like certain groups, it's still almost, I feel like making space for like other ethnicities to be, it's still like, I feel like part of that conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you that question because I was really hesitant using the term Asian Canadian, because I know it's just like Asian in general, it's such a broad word and encompasses so many different lived experiences and so many different people and communities. But then it's also like the only one we really have right now, it feels like. There's also AAPI as well, but that one's still very broad. AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander,
Okay.
I think that's right, I don't know. But there's still really broad terms, and sometimes, it makes, especially your question, like it makes me wonder, are we really united under that term? Do we really feel like a collective? Are we really fighting for the same things? And are certain people being left out when we talk about Asian?
Probably.
Yeah, and I definitely think, especially right now in mainstream media, sometimes Asian actually just means East Asian.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of, like, so many people left out of that, and it's, I just wanted to bring that up.
I remember growing up, it was interesting that in media and stuff, I'd sometimes see like queer people in media if they were like East Asian, but I never saw anyone that was like South Asian. So that's one thing that I remember, like, you know, seeing that, you know, difference. But maybe it just has to do with like, a lot of like, I guess like when people immigrated and how many generations they've been outside of their homeland, you know? Even the continent of Asia, it's so broad that like there's so many subcategories in that. And each subcategory is big. Like South Asian is really big, East Asian is like really big. Like there's, you know.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've started to think about, I think it's really powerful if we were able to feel super united under the term Asian. But I also think it's really important to distinguish when we're talking about certain experiences, because we do experience like oppression differently and discrimination differently. And so I think it's important to not use Asian as a monolithic experience and identity, but then to also, I guess like what I'm trying to talk about is like we should be able to fight for each other still. Like sometimes I feel like either we're too concentrating on dividing and like just being like distinctive and distinguished from one another, and then sometimes we're trying to lump all of us into like one big.
I feel like also like there should be more empathy between the different groups, because it's like you experience very similar things. So like if one group of people is facing discrimination that you're not on that, you still know what it feels like.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of we should be able to fight for the same thing, like get to a better place and like not leave other people behind. So I shouldn't be able to find like some sort of like equity or whatever, so that other like lesser privileged groups, they don't get to come along with me. So if I get to a better place, but I have to do it on top of people that are lesser privileged, then I'm not really achieving anything good. Yeah, I think that's like a really big critique, especially in East Asian communities. There's a lot of privilege that we have. It's a really difficult privilege to reconcile with. But sometimes I feel like, are we just getting to this place or getting other treatment because we're doing it, like distancing ourselves from other people of color, other communities?
What type of privileges do you mean?
I guess like one obvious one is the model minority myth. We're often seen as like the good minority.
Oh yeah.
Like that's what other people of color should aspire to be.
Educated, successful.
Yeah, educated, successful. We don't talk much. We don't fight back too much, and like quiet and obedient and good, and almost like accomplices to like, essentially like goals of white supremacy. I think we could really talk about it like that. And definitely, I think a lot of people have talked about having experiences where they've been told that like you're not like you're a person of color, but you're not really a person of color. Like you're basically a white person because of the privileges that you have. And I think in some ways that's almost like a critique to make. Like how much have I benefited from this? But also I think the bigger critique is how complacent have I become in this privilege that I have. Okay, I want to shift gears.
Actually, it's also nice to be in an environment that was like much more queer than like what I'd experienced. Like I think in high school, I personally knew of like maybe 2 people or 3 people who were like queer, and I wasn't. I don't remember if I was out or not. I think to some friends later. Like in high school I was, but being here in Vancouver at art school was you know, being thrown into it. And it was great. I really liked that actually. I felt like I had a lot of almost like self-judgment and like internalized, I guess, homophobic thoughts sometimes, or like, and I felt like a lot of those like broke down from being in an environment that was much more like open-minded.
More welcoming. It's also nice to not feel like the one person that's different in a room. That's nice to see. like diverse
Yes.
identities and experiences, and some that mirror your own.
Yes.
Makes you feel like, okay, like I can also be like this too
Exactly.
in this space.
Yes. Yeah. And also I felt like, you know, it just like being in an environment that's so diverse, it just helps you not be so judgmental, you know? You just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, because then you meet other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it helps you to learn that not everybody's experience is like your own, and how to be
Yes.
more inclusive of
Yes,
that.
exactly.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had to come out then, like when you came to Vancouver? Or was it just sort of like natural, just sort of happened?
I think, yeah, just like, it was very chill when I was here, so, no, I didn't have to come out. No, I mean, like, from the beginning, people knew. Also, it's just like a thing that just was, you brought up in conversation, you know? I don't even know how it happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Just organically, I guess?
Yeah, it was literally
Comes out
very,
sometimes.
yeah, exactly. Talking about relationships, dating,
Yeah.
it just comes out.
It's a natural.
Yeah, it was just pretty natural. I liked that a lot. I really liked that. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like the whole concept of coming out or having to come out, or yeah, just that sort of thing?
There's so many aspects to that. I think that it never really stops. But also, I realize that one, people don't need to know, you know, like they're not entitled to know things about you if you don't want to share them. And also, sometimes it's just more about like, at least like for me, I prefer to just bring it up organically if it is in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like the way cis straight people bring it up. Like they don't go
Yeah,
around being like, I'm straight, by the way.
exactly.
But just
Yeah.
like, yeah, my boyfriend or my
Yeah.
partner or whatever. Yeah.
But I do think that like the society that we live in is one where heteronormativity
Yeah. No, you said
I say it right?
Yes, you did.
is the norm.
Yes.
You know, and so there is like times when, you know, like you do sometimes have to come out.
You do,
And it's something, it's like, it's a significant thing to, like it can be quite significant for many people. There's a lot of pressures involved in it, a lot of anxiety, and yeah, I think that everyone should just like go at their own pace and like never be forced into something.
No.
And you know, only share something if they feel safe and comfortable to do so. Yeah. And also like, don't even need to like put certain like words to like things, you know. You don't have to call yourself something if you don't feel like that fits you. You know, you can just describe it if that makes it better. And I've noticed for a lot of my friends it's just like they just describe how they feel in terms of their like, you know, sexual orientation, and they don't necessarily like a certain word attached to it. And that's just like, it is what it is. They are who they are. And that's, you know, that's all that matters.
Yeah, it gives room for change because sexuality is not stagnant.
Yeah.
It could change.
Yes, true. That's true for sure, yeah. I feel like our generation is like, it's much less of a deal, like big deal, than it is for previous ones. And that's something that it becomes almost like butting heads, where, for example, for me, it's like, it really isn't a big deal, but for I know older generations, it is a big deal for them. And sometimes I just can't come around to like, why is it such a big deal? Why does it matter? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a generational difference. Even my younger sibling, they're 6 years younger than me, but the way they talk about their friends, it's even different from the way we used to talk about stuff in middle school and in high school. So it's really nice to see that the younger generations are also a lot more open as well.
I noticed that too. It's like, I don't know, I feel like it gives a lot of hope. Yeah.
I think I asked Mona this question, but
What I've wanted to see.
yeah, we wanted to see.
I think growing up, it would have been, nice to see more casualness surrounding, I guess, like queerness and identity, and for it to not be taboo or to even be like reminiscent of that, for it just to be part of like normal conversation if it comes up. Yeah, I think that's something that would have like really helped, like that whole attitude towards it.
Yeah, casualness is a great one. Just seeing people exist and living. Really,
I didn't even meet that many queer people until I moved from Calgary to Vancouver. Yeah. Probably, I don't even know if I met any.
If there were like words of wisdom, some sort of knowledge that you could let younger you know, what would you say? Or would you say anything?
I would just say that you'll figure it out at your own pace, and yeah, just keep going. Just like trust yourself, trust your gut instincts.
That's really nice, really lovely.